This female corpse looks completely intact on the outside, but her ankles and wrists are shattered. And inside this pale, smooth body, her lungs are worse than a 30-year smoker's. During the autopsy, the forensic doctor even found a whole mandrake flower in her stomach, along with some strange cloth strips. They even found an ancient religious talisman under her skin. Where did this unidentified corpse with an unknown cause of death even come from? That day, a sudden family massacre happened in the town without any warning. From the scene, there were no signs of a break-in, and the victims seemed to be desperately trying to escape the house. Even with decades of investigative experience, the sheriff, faced with such a brutal scene, couldn't find a single clue about the killer at the scene. He could only classify this case as a locked room murder. Besides that, the police found a female corpse in the basement. Unlike the upstairs victims, this corpse was very clean, and her face looked peacefully asleep. But this corpse seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The police couldn't find any ID information in the system. With no leads, the sheriff could only hope the coroner could help. But the coroner had already left for the day, so reluctantly, he had to ask Tony for help. Tony runs a privately licensed autopsy lab and is a seasoned coroner. This private lab has been passed down to Tony as the third generation. It's a family business. While the sheriff was briefing Tony with some basic info, the cat beside him suddenly growled. Tony just thought it was because of a stranger's presence and didn't pay much attention. Odin had planned to go on a date with his girlfriend, but seeing the sheriff show up at this hour, he knew it was urgent. He couldn't bear to leave his elderly father working alone, so he asked his girlfriend if they could see the midnight movie at 11 instead. His girlfriend understood and agreed, then drove off. Before leaving, the sheriff seriously emphasized that this family massacre was extremely brutal, so he pleaded with Tony to find out the cause of death tonight. After the sheriff left, Tony stepped outside for a smoke, then began the autopsy. Usually, an autopsy has 3 steps. First, an external evaluation and examination. Next, dissecting the internal organs, and finally, opening the skull to examine the brain. Combining the results of all these checks, the cause of death is finally determined. Odin, after a preliminary external assessment, estimated the corpse to be between 20 and 25 years old. There were no bruises, bleeding, or visible scars on the body. She had brown hair, gray eyes that had lost all life, and seemed to have been dead for several days. But the corpse's skin was not only pale and smooth, it had no lividity. Her limbs were even flexible like a living person, making it hard to believe she'd been dead for days. Since the corpse was found in the basement, Tony thought the low temperature might have delayed decomposition. Odin also noticed that her waist was insanely thin, severely out of proportion with the rest of her body. To know the exact reason, they'd have to wait until after the autopsy. Tony had his son record all the discovered anomalies on the blackboard. As the examination progressed, Tony found severe fractures in her wrists and ankles. With injuries this severe, there should be marks on the corpse. But the corpse's surface had nothing, even silky smooth as if airbrushed. Then Odin checked her mouth and finally found the only wound on her body. Judging by the clean edges, the tongue had been forcibly cut off. These 2 features reminded Tony of a human trafficking case from 15 years ago. Traffickers had tied the hands and feet of 2 girls together. To keep them from making noise, the traffickers cruelly cut off their tongues. These 2 traits were present on this corpse too, so Tony, based on experience, inferred it was likely a human trafficking case. With a preliminary direction set, the 2 continued their work. Odin was taking photos for evidence when the corpse's nose suddenly twitched. As blood slowly trickled out, a fly flew from her nostril. Corpses often attract flies, so they didn't pay much attention and continued checking external details. As the examination went deeper, more bizarre phenomena emerged. They even found peat in her hair and between her fingers, which only exists in the US Northeast. But this was the South, and peat could only be bought at nurseries. Tony noticed she was missing a tooth, and a fine thread was lodged in the gap. It seemed to be a fiber from linen fabric. Additionally, while checking her lower body, Tony found, although she showed no signs of assault, her internal muscles were all torn. It's unimaginable what a young girl must have gone through before dying. With so many anomalies, the father and son had to continue the autopsy to uncover the truth. Odin looked at the wall clock, only an hour left until his date. But the autopsy was just entering step 2. Seeing his concern, his father told him he could leave early, but Odin couldn't let him work alone. Seeing his son's resolve, Tony didn't argue, just sped up preparations. They propped up the corpse's head with tools to prevent blood from backflowing and contaminating the work area. Once everything was ready, Tony was about to start the autopsy. The radio suddenly started playing creepy music for no reason, startling both of them. Odin switched the channel to rock music, while Tony began the Y-shaped autopsy. But as he finished the last cut, a gush of blood suddenly poured out. In autopsies, bleeding is normal, but not from someone dead for several days. Tony had only seen this in freshly dead bodies. To solve the mystery of the corpse, they hurried with the autopsy. Odin collected a small vial of blood and put it in the fridge for later analysis. But soon a puddle of blood appeared at the bottom of the fridge. When Odin opened the fridge, he realized the corpse's blood had corroded the vial. While he cleaned the fridge, Tony finally figured out one anomaly. It turned out her extremely thin waist was likely from wearing a tight corset for years. but only European nobles in the 16th century used such extreme slimming methods. It's rare in modern times because one wrong move could puncture the ribs and cause death. After removing the deformed ribs, Tony couldn't believe how charred the lungs were. Even someone smoking 10 packs a day for 30 years wouldn't reach this level. Odin wondered if this could be the cause of death, but Tony said, with lungs this charred, the whole body should have third-degree burns. The skin couldn't possibly be this pale and smooth. Even more absurdly, her heart and other organs were covered in scar tissue. Logically, her body should have already been mangled. Just as they were at a loss, thunder struck outside, and the lights inside started flickering. Then a series of bangs came from outside the door. Odin followed the sound to the hallway corner and saw a tall, dark figure reflected in the mirror. But when he walked over, there was nothing, though the sounds didn't stop. So Odin kept walking down the hallway, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Meanwhile, Tony made a new discovery. The inside of the corpse's skin seemed to have some strange patterns. He was about to cut it open to take a closer look, but accidentally cut his wrist on a broken rib. Tony had to put down his tools for a moment and carefully clean the wound. At that moment, Odin followed the sound to a storage room and heard something strange in the ventilation duct. He stepped on a stool to see inside, and suddenly a dark shadow darted past. Odin got scared and fell to the ground, and the loud noise drew Tony over as well. After getting up, Odin shone his light into the duct, and to his surprise, it was their cat stuck inside. The cat was covered in blood and obviously badly hurt. They both knew it couldn't be saved. So Tony gently took the cat from his son's hands, held it close, and reluctantly ended its life. This cat was a keepsake left by his wife and meant a lot to Tony. He told Odin to go back to the autopsy room first, wanting to process his emotions himself. A minute later, Tony pulled himself together and immediately got back to the autopsy work. Next, following procedure, he checked the digestive system to see if poisoning had caused the death. But when Tony cut open the stomach, they were completely shocked. They actually pulled out a whole intact flower from the stomach. Tony quickly grabbed a flower encyclopedia and found out it was called datura, a highly toxic hallucinogen. If ingested, it could make someone pass out at the least, or kill them at worst. This could be the real cause of the corpse's death, but that theory was soon disproven. Tony then found a cloth bundle in the stomach. Inside, there was not only a tooth, but also strange markings that looked very ancient. Odin compared it with the thread and cloth they had found before and realized they were made of the same material. Then he compared the tooth to the corpse's socket, and it matched perfectly. Odin started analyzing. The corpse had been tied up, and then her tongue had been cut out. She was poisoned to paralyze her and forced to swallow the cloth bundle with the tooth inside. Then her joints were broken, her internal organs stabbed, and finally she was set on fire. Putting all the evidence together pointed to a horrifying possibility, a living human sacrifice. Outside, lightning flashed and thunder roared, and that creepy song started playing again for no reason. Odin felt something was off and wanted to urge his dad to leave quickly. But Tony seemed possessed, continuing the autopsy, and soon made another discovery. It seemed like there was something under the corpse's skin, so Tony planned to cut it open with his scalpel. When they lifted the skin completely, they were shocked to see a larger sigil tattooed underneath. The scene in front of them was mind-blowing, leaving the father and son speechless. At that moment, the nearby corpse freezer slowly opened. Then the overhead light bulb exploded, plunging the autopsy room into total darkness. Odin immediately turned on his phone and, using the dim light, found his father. Luckily, Tony wasn't hurt. After all these unexplainable events, even the scientifically steadfast Tony began to waver. The father and son didn't dare stay and ran straight out. When they reached the hallway, the generator started up, but it only provided basic lighting, not enough to run the elevator. If they wanted to escape the basement, the only way left was the light well. But bad luck, strong wind outside had knocked a tree over, landing right on the light well door. Odin tried to call for help on his phone, but there was no signal. To get help, they could only rely on the office landline. So the father and son had to turn back, but they seemed to hear footsteps at the end of the hallway. Seeing this, they rushed into the office and locked the door. Tony quickly dialed the phone, but the signal cut off before he could speak. Then a bell rang outside the door, shocking them both. They knew perfectly well that these bells were tied to corpses' feet to prevent someone from faking death. As the sound got closer, Odin crouched to the door crack to see what was happening. A pair of feet dragging a bell suddenly appeared at the door, and then something outside started banging furiously. The father and son quickly moved a cabinet to block the door, and after a while the banging finally stopped. But Tony's wrist wound split open again from the effort of blocking the door, so he went to the bathroom to clean it. But while washing, Tony felt someone standing behind the shower curtain. When he lifted it to look, it had disappeared. Before they could catch a breath, Tony was yanked away by a force. When Odin forced the door open, he saw his father lying on the ground in pain. Hearing the door open behind him, it seemed the monster had gone out. Odin quickly checked his father's injuries and saw a huge handprint on his stomach. Judging by the bruising, his ribs were probably broken. Weakly, Tony told his son that he clearly saw the monster had gray eyes identical to the corpse's. They realized they couldn't just sit there and wait to die. Maybe their only chance was to completely figure out the corpse's cause of death. They returned to the autopsy room, and found the organs taken from the corpse were already rotting. But the ones inside her body were perfectly preserved, as if the body was deliberately keeping them intact. Seeing this, Tony made a snap decision to push the corpse into the incinerator. But as they moved the body, the door behind them closed on its own. Sensing something was wrong, Odin grabbed a fire axe and chopped at the wooden door until he made a small hole. Noise came from outside again. Odin peeked through the hole and saw a person with eyes and mouth sewn shut screaming. Tony recognized them too, but the body that had been lying in the freezer during the day was somehow moving. Odin didn't think twice, grabbed some alcohol, and poured it over the corpse. Tony cooperated, lit the kindling, and threw it, illuminating the entire autopsy room. Just as they thought it was finally over, the flames suddenly grew. The fire spread rapidly from the ceiling to the whole room, burning the camera recording the autopsy. Tony quickly grabbed a fire extinguisher, but the next second the flames seemed to have a mind of their own, quickly shrinking until they were completely out on the corpse. Just as they were about to breathe easy, they looked back and saw the corpse's body had not a single burn mark. While they were puzzled, the sound of the elevator starting came from outside, and the door that wouldn't open before, Tony managed to pull it open easily. This was their only chance to escape. Without thinking twice, they grabbed axes and ran out. When they reached the elevator, the doors were just closing, moving up the building. The shadow appeared in the mirror again. As the sound got closer, they stood at the elevator like lambs to the slaughter. Tony grabbed the axe from his son, planning to buy a little more time for him. At the crucial moment, the elevator doors restarted, and they quickly got in. But the old, worn-out iron gate got stuck in the elevator doors. The bell was right in front of them. Tony swung without hesitation, and the ringing stopped abruptly. After a while, they regained a bit of their strength. Then Odin stepped forward to get a clear look, only to find the girl who had come looking for him lying on the ground. Watching his girlfriend's life fade away, Odin was in agony. At that moment, the elevator started again, and his father quickly pulled Odin in. But the elevator stopped halfway, as if the corpse was deliberately playing with them. Trapped in the cramped elevator, they had no choice but to stay put, holding their breath, waiting for the next move. After calming down, Odin didn't blame his father, since no one can predict accidents. With the elevator broken, they had to find a way out, and the corpse hadn't stopped killing. Somehow she opened the incinerator from a distance. Thick smoke quickly filled the entire basement, leaving them no way out. So they decided to face their fear and return to the autopsy lab to find the cause of death. Maybe that was the only way to stop her. Only the brain remained unchecked, and to save time, Odin didn't bother shaving and went straight to opening the skull. Unlike her organs, the corpse's brain had no scar tissue. Tony sensed something was off and had Odin cut a small piece of the meninges. Under the microscope, Odin turned pale with fear. The corpse's blood cells were extremely active. Tony finally understood why they couldn't find the cause of death. The corpse wasn't dead at all, but she had her organs removed, so survival was impossible, unless some mysterious force was sustaining her false life. As Tony pondered, an anxious Odin fiddled with the cloth with the talisman on it. Folding it, the symbols formed a phrase. Leviticus, chapter 20, verse 27. Leviticus is part of the Bible, which just happened to be in the house. Tony quickly grabbed the Bible from the shelf and turned to the chapter to read carefully. The chapter roughly stated, in 1693, anyone involved in witchcraft, male or female, was to be executed. And all the features on the corpse matched the torture methods used on 17th century executed witches. But the cloth said the corpse was from the New England region in the Northeast. But Salem had no witches, only the Salem witch trials and injustices. The truth finally emerged. The corpse was an innocent girl from centuries ago, wrongfully executed. So she had been seeking revenge, and this was just a stop on her path. Even after 300 years, her vengeance ritual hadn't ended. Tony suddenly realized the corpse could sense everything happening around her. His broken ribs and wrists cut by ribs were probably her doing. Even now, she was still experiencing pain. At that moment, something slammed into the door. That damn corpse was back again. As Odin ran to block the door, Tony explained how to stop the revenge. The method was to transfer all the corpse's pain onto himself. Tony said he wouldn't resist, just pleading for his son to be spared. After a moment, the corpse seemed to agree, and the banging outside stopped. Then Tony's face twisted, as if he was enduring extreme pain. His body sustained various injuries. Meanwhile, the corpse's corresponding parts rapidly healed, and her cloudy eyes turned lively brown. She had transferred all her suffering away. Overwhelmed by pain, Tony collapsed, weakly pointing at a nearby scalpel. Odin understood his father's intention but couldn't bring himself to act. Seeing his father's struggle, he decided to plunge the knife in. Perhaps death was a release for his father. Losing two loved ones in succession left Odin feeling dead inside. But his life had been bought by his father, and he had to survive no matter what. After a while, the power came back, and the radio played rock music again. At that moment, a voice broke through Odin's grief. It was the sheriff. The sheriff said he had moved the tree above, but Odin pushed several times and still couldn't open the door. The two had been talking, but unexpectedly, the sheriff started singing eerily. When he turned to run, he saw his father standing behind him. The corpse didn't spare him either, and Odin fell to his death. The next morning, the clear sky seemed unaffected by last night's storm. When the sheriff arrived at the basement, he found Tony and Odin were already dead. The scene mirrored the previous family massacre, no signs of forced entry. The photos and recorder on the blackboard were burned, but the corpse remained intact on the table. Although the sheriff didn't know what had happened, it was clearly linked to this corpse. So the sheriff decided to move the corpse out of his town and send it to the Research Institute at Virginia Federal University. At this point, the movie ends. The corpse being sent to the institute might mean this 300-year-long revenge was just beginning. And this grand revenge ritual doesn't seem over. What do you think? Feel free to comment below, like, and follow. We'll see you next time.